Welcome to In Collaboration With, a conversation series from the teaching cooperative Writing Collab about craft, culture, publishing, and community. I'm Brian Gresko here in my studio in Brooklyn, and today I am delighted to be talking with Joseph Osmundson. Joe Osmundson is a scientist, writer, and queer health advocate. He holds a PhD in molecular biophysics and is currently a clinical associate professor of biology at New York University. His writing has been published in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and Time magazine, among other venues, and his books include Virology, Essays for the Living, the Dead, and the Small Things in Between, which was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award. And now the memoir, Spawning Season, an experiment in queer parenthood. Spawning Season is about Joe's experience of almost becoming a biological father and co-parent with a lesbian couple he had known since college. It is at once a meditation on queerness, desire, family, and grief, a scientific exploration of reproduction in both humans and salmon, and a bold personal story, written in exquisite, often poetic prose. Joe, I loved Spawning Season so much. Thank you for being here to talk about it. Welcome.
It's my pleasure. There is truly nothing more mortifying than listening to your bio being read. I'm like, it actually gets me over the anxiety of doing an event because once I've heard my bio read aloud, it's like that's the worst part. That's as bad as the event can go.
Joe, I know authors who have written their memoirs while the events in the book were still unfolding. And I also know authors who have required years of processing before they felt able to write their memoirs. What about you? At what point did you begin writing about the events in this book? And when did you know that you had a book on your hands?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I think each project is a little bit different. There's the 4-year rule that you're not supposed to write about something until you have 4 years of distance from it, and other people write. Some of my favorite books have sort of been written from the within the experience. This book is sort of a both and writing as I was going through the process of really, especially stepping out of the situation where I thought I was going to become a dad. Writing became quite compulsive and a way to fill the void that I couldn't even acknowledge to myself, that I was sort of in denial that I was being taken out of this family structure that we had built over many years. And it was a void because we had been planning, been spending so much time planning, meeting and planning and had doctor's appointments. And we were, thinking about the first few years of life of life of a child, which is just full of noise and cries and screams and playing. It's a cacophony. And so when I was sort of stepping back from all of that, there was so much silence that I started writing compulsively to fill that void. And it was very much not a book. It's like 400,000 words of just, pure, unfiltered language coming from me, but then also research on the ecology and cycles of salmon. So it sort of immediately was always both of those things, but it was not geared toward a piece of art and a reader. It was just to make noise to myself, to process myself, to understand what I had gone through. And so it actually became the process of writing this book was like a very difficult chiseling away. I think of that document as like a piece of marble, and this book as like a bust that is sort of a tenth the size of the piece of marble that it began with. And really that's where the craft came in, because the language was there. I've always had no problem generating language. The hard part is making something good and something that you can add. The thing about a book is we writers are asking for a huge act of generosity from a reader. We're asking for a huge amount of their time and their intellectual and emotional energy. And so craft to me is about how to earn that time and how to share that experience with the reader. So that took many years. It took many years until I could go back. That definitely was the 4-year rule. It was more than 4 years before I could actually think about what a book would look like.
In my experience, the process of writing for the self and writing for an audience has always been porous. The seed of a piece might begin in a journal, but while transforming it for an audience, which I agree is where craft comes to play, that often opens up new memories, thoughts, and feelings, which send me back to the journal again. for further personal exploration.
I think that's 100% correct. And I think one of the beautiful things about nonfiction, and I know that fiction does this too in the fiction that I write, but I think it, particularly nonfiction, when you're thinking about memoir as not the story of a life, but a story from a life. So it's a contained story of an aspect or a thing that has happened to you. You know, there was nothing that made me consider my relationship to my parents more than thinking about having a kid. And then a lot of that had been subconscious as I was living it. And then I had to really do that hard emotional labor. And I was also in therapy, but I had to do that hard emotional labor, or the page gave me an opportunity to do that hard emotional labor in a more concrete way, in a way where I could take things from the subconscious or maybe things that I hadn't realized that I had realized, and I could concretize them through language and through written language. I think there's something magic about craft in written language, even as it acts upon the self. And my favorite writers usually then share that process of self-transformation with the reader as an opportunity for the reader to be altered as well.
Since you mentioned your parents, it brings to mind how you write in Spawning Season that there are elements of the story that you are telling which your parents have yet to hear. In classes, I often encounter students who say that what is holding them back from writing about their life is that there are living family members who they don't want to read it, something which can kind of become an excuse for them not to write. How did you navigate that? And did you end up talking about the book with your parents? Or is this an area of your life which you just avoid discussing?
I think having written the book, it would be unfair for me to deny my parents the conversations. I have a very early, before I became a writer, I was a student of literature in French. And my favorite writer in French, or one of my favorite writers in French, is Marguerite Duras. And she has this interesting thing in her books where she will write the same book multiple times, like literally the same story. The story of her being sort of 15 and a half and having a love affair with an older man is in three different novels. Un barrage contre le Pacifique, which I think is translated in English as The Seawall. And it's not a very good novel. And it was written while her mom was still alive. And then The Lover, which was written in 1983, is the retelling of that same story. And it is a devastatingly, hauntingly gorgeous. It's her best work, and also won her the Prix Goncourt, and she became sort of a different level of writer in France because of that book. And she says that the difference between the bad novel and the good novel is that her mom had died, and that there were things that she could not write down because she knew they would embarrass her mother. So for me, as an 18, 19-year-old studying those texts and hearing Marguerite talk about that, I just decided that I was never going to do that. It was just like, I want to be able to access the truth in art without that inhibition. And if it embarrasses my family, we can talk about that. They've by and large been pretty gracious. I have the story that I wrote. Actually, it's not online anymore because the Gawker RIP came down. But there was this time that I had a friend who was very, very drunk at a bar, and I thought he wouldn't make it home safely. So I brought him home with me just out of like friendship. And he got totally naked and fell asleep in bed with me. But then in the middle of the night, my parents were staying with me, got up and like went to the wrong room and got naked in bed with my father. And so I wrote this essay about it. And of course, he assumed that this was not just a friend of mine who was drunk, but that I had brought this naked man and so it just became this like real moment of fracture, but also like I was just trying to do the right thing. And he was, so I wrote an essay about it and I read it out loud at a reading that my parents came to in Portland. So, we have this ability, we can hold space for each other without necessarily even understanding each other fully. I don't think my parents understand my writing or my impetus to write or why I need to do it. And I do think it embarrasses them at the same time that they're proud of it. But I made the decision very early on in my artistic life that I wouldn't be inhibited. The harder part with this book was navigating the relationships of the people who are very close to me, the people with whom I lived this experience, the people I almost had a kid with. We all have massive feelings about that experience. And as I tried to write about in the book, they're all valid. I'm not angry at any, we all were like making really hard decisions about our wants and needs. And I was doing an event and with the other writers, we were talking about how sometimes you don't know what you want until you lived it. And we all went through these processes of I didn't realize how bad I wanted to be a bio dad until that became possible for me. I didn't understand how deep that want was until I had the opportunity to have it happen. Probably because I was suppressing it because I thought it couldn't happen. So those were very difficult relationships to navigate in the writing and editing of this book. Ultimately, everyone who was very close to me in my queer family in my life had to be okay with this book being out. And so that took real difficult conversations and negotiation. And I'm very like, I'll change your name, I'll change biographical details. I don't believe that nonfiction can't contain those compromises for safety and for community of the people who've lived it with you. So I'm not precious about that, but it was important for me to be able to write honestly about my experience, even though other people had big feelings about it as well.
I'm grateful that you did. I think this book gets to the heart of how queerness is inherently experimental. You don't always know what you want until you try and experience and discover it. And you don't always have clear models or pathways for what you want your life to be. I found it so powerful how you discover the importance of your caregiving parts and the ways in which you come to recognize how they show up in many relationships as a partner, as a son, as a friend, I mean, even with your dog. I'm queer and have been a nurturing caregiver and an at home parent. And that at times has required working against internal inhibitions because I was taught that men only care in certain ways, like by providing financially, first and foremost, at least within the context of family. And I want to personally thank you. I mean, you've, the spawning season adds to the literature that challenges that harmful stereotype.
Well, I mean, it limits the possibility of expansive life for men as well, right? I mean, this is the sort of feminist argument that gender roles don't just harm women; they dehumanize men, and I've always believed that. I get so many questions about why, as a young person, I identified more with motherhood than fatherhood, and it gets exactly to this point of nourishment that there was no model in my in the 1980s and early 1990s in my small Washington town for nurturing men. They did not exist. Men were either emotionally distant or physically violent. End of story. The only emotion you were allowed as a man was anger. And I was a curious, nerdy, somewhat effeminate gay kid, and my friends' mothers would ask me what books I was reading or what classes I liked in school. And they were curious about me and they made me feel safe. They were nurturing. And I had that model that I wanted to be like that. And I really am so grateful for the like 8-year-old self who put up with a lot of bullying. Like was what, the bell hooks quote that the first feminine thing that men have to do, that the men will harm, has to be in themselves in order to survive. And if they don't do it, other boys will do it to them, do that violence to them for being feminine. And that was just like something clicked in me where I was like, well, that's my whole childhood. And I'm really grateful for my younger self who went through the bullying but did not ever lose the softness and femininity and call to nurture. I think for me, the thing that I really had to write about in this book was I've always been a giver. And I think there are ways in which you can be a giver that are actually dehumanizing to the self. It's that sort of queer notion that because we're queer and therefore not valuable, I have to earn my affection, I have to earn my love through doing acts of service, that I'm not inherently worthy of love, that the only way I can get someone to care for me is to give, 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 give. That is definitely, uh, you know, um, the orientation I had through a lot of my life to this nourishment that I was so longing to give to others. And the big thing that I write about in the book is how I had to, through grief, turn that nourishment back toward myself and how to learn to nourish the self and to write about nourishing the self. And that this care that I had been so willing to give to others, I had actually been withholding from myself and believing that I needed to give that care to others in order to receive not even care back, but just presence. So these are the gifts that writing can give us, that some of that internal work, some of those realizations you can work out on the page.
What did self care look like for you while doing that work, while writing the book? And what does it look like now, doing events and having these kind of conversations about it?
Yeah, I write so much in the book about cooking and nourishment as my number one form of self-care. And that for a long time it would be for other people. And then through this process of almost having a kid and grieving the kid that I didn't have, it really turned. I had to cook, I had to nourish myself in that same way. The journey of having such a tender grief-filled book out in the world has been surprising in every possible way. People's reactions to it are so intimate, and at times I've been so surprised by my own emotional reactions. Sometimes I feel very proud, and sometimes I feel very exposed in a negative way, and it sort of shifts day in and day out, and with this event and that, and this city and that, and I don't really know how to predict what it's going to feel like. And so I think the biggest form of self-care through all that is just not judging, just being, yeah, that's how this, when I first put on Facebook, like I have a book out and it's about this time I almost had a kid. The people's reaction, it was mortifying because almost no one in my life knew that. This was something that I held very close to really my inner circle of friends. And so it felt horrible to have people asking me questions about it. And then I got really nervous that book tour is going to be awful. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm not going to be able to talk. And it hasn't been like that at all. So I think it's just being, so much about being in my 40s is just willing to be surprised by my emotional reactions to things. And everyone talks about your 40s or middle age like it's the best because you know yourself and you know how you're going to react to things. And that has just not been my case. I am still very surprised by the situations I find myself in and my emotional reactions to them. So I think the biggest form of self-care is just not judging that. It's just accepting that that was my emotional response, being curious about it. Like, I wonder why I'm mortified by this person asking me this question and another person asking me the same question, and I'm not mortified by it. So I think it's just, you know, accepting that middle age is not the answer to all the questions, but it is just another iterative time where you will always be asking questions, surprised by the answers. And it really, that just provides new material for introspection, for art, for community.
I am so glad you said that. Thank you. I remember growing up, my parents celebrated 40 by having parties with like black balloons and posters announcing they were over the hill.
Over
All I
the
got
hill.
was gag gifts, like t shirts that
Yes.
said, I think like I'm 20, I feel like I'm 60, I must be 40. I completely agree. Middle age has been a very surprising place, and I'm still learning new things about myself and people in the world, all of it. I mean, I'd like to think I'm able and willing to live more honestly and closely at things than I did when I was younger, when ego and anxiety got in the way more than they do now.
I think I'm actually much less certain of my own narratives of myself than I was at 20, 24, or even 30. I think there was something about the PTSD of growing up rural, queer, and poor, that I had to be very certain of narratives of myself in order to survive, in order to be here in New York and in grad school and do the things that I had to do. I had to be certain of this is the type of person that I am. Yeah, I think all these experiences where I've just been so surprised by things that have happened in my life, have not necessarily made that sense of self fall away, but those narratives are no longer essential to survival. And so maybe that opens them up to interrogation in a way that I couldn't do when I was younger.
Yeah, I feel that. Can you tell me a bit? And I'm sorry because I feel like you probably get this question at every event. But can you tell us a little bit about Fry? And now that the book has been out for a while, how have readers been receiving Fry?
Some people are afraid to ask, actually. You'd be surprised that like some people are afraid. So Fry, for the listeners who haven't read, is a version of the child I didn't have who first materialized to me in dreams and then became sort of this real embodied humanoid creature that I carried around with myself. And I think the biggest thing that um, I do need to talk about with this book is that the the salmon is not metaphor. We really did call our child that we were going to have this animal. That was a part of our process. We named her that as sort of as a joke. There's a lot of things that are like joke, not jokes in this book, right? Even like me and Kay talking about having a kid together first started like, if we're still single when we're 50, we'll just get married. It started as kind of that type of joke, but it was never purely a joke. And so we really called our kid a baby fish. And when I was in that denial stage of grief, that's why I was researching tens of thousands of words of science and ecology of salmon. It was because that was who we were planning to have. And Fry also was not a metaphor. I mean, she was very real. And grief is very nonsensical, and that's one of the places that my grief went, was into making this creature that I could talk to. There's another way I think of making language, making writing that's not on the page, but of making a lived experience for myself to create something out of the void of grief. And so, I was telling a good friend actually who had just finished the book, Salima, who's actually in the book, one of my best friends. She asked about Fry just before the book came out, and I was like, I feel like she's off to college. Like she's still in my life. We still chat on the phone, but I need to sort of let her do her own thing. And then through the process of other people reading the book and doing these events, she's felt like she's home on summer break, like she's back in my life. There's a scene in the book where I put her in the car and we drive to the beach and we have this like father-daughter day at the beach. And like we did that again this summer. I got in the car, we went to Brighton Beach, we got Ukrainian food, and just that moment of, after doing a bunch of events, that moment of reflection and togetherness. And like the whole reason why this had to be a book as well was because I had had this loss, and the child that I didn't have was such a void that the book could become something tangible in the world, something real to me and to other people. And Fry was sort of that same thing, where this thing that had just been a lack really asked to become something material in the world.
There's that point in the narrative where your therapist introduces you to Jung's concept of the anima and animus. And I thought too, when reading about Fry, how during hypnotherapy sessions I have envisioned powerfully moving experiences and how they have had an emotional reality and a bodily presence for me. I think I've read the areas of the brain that are involved in imagining and envisioning and dreaming are the same as the ones involved with memory. And Fry felt related to all of these. And the way that you write about Fry is so powerful and so beautiful. I loved it.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I had stayed away from a lot of psychoanalytic theory for so long because I just thought it was meaningless at a pull complex drivel. But it actually, I find I'm reading The Pleasure of the Text again right now, which I haven't read in a long time. And I'm like, this is just a Gunner's philosophy. There's this whole like 3-page thing about the difference between pleasure and jouissance, which is like this complex French word for orgasm. And he's like, pleasure is not just a little orgasm, and orgasm is not just big pleasure. And I'm like, this is just gooning people. Like this is, and the language is so lush and beautiful. So I just love, again, being surprised by these things that we find even in texts that we've read before. And when my therapist asked me to read Jung on the anima and animus, it was after I had sort of been living with this creature who had come to me. And the whole notion of Jung is both so freeing gender-wise and so fuck gender-wise, where like every person is born with fully male and fully female brains, and it's just our men get to live the male, and so the female becomes subconscious. And like I was like, "Poof, that's amazing." But then it's like, of course, the female is like connected to the earth and into it, and so it's also incredibly binary and gendered in a very fucked way. But the way that Emma Young is writing about the anima coming to the man is through a creature, half human, half animal, who comes to the father and demands to be recognized. And I had not read this book. Like this was after I had been having this weird thing with this fish creature. So it was just sort of like mind bending that I was living this experience that had sort of been documented psychoanalytically many, many decades prior.
Yeah, and theory works its way into the book in other ways as well. I mean, Jose Esteban Munoz is someone that you write about a few times, and I've seen Munoz's work referenced at this point by many authors I admire. I'm going to absolutely be checking out his book, Cruising Utopia.
And I think his first book, Disidentifications, is also phenomenal, which is about how, sort of queerness being against straightness reifies straightness in a way. So it's like queerness sort of like can't get away from reifying the very thing it's trying to undermine. And what do we do with that? I think so for me, it's very hard to write memoir without theory because theoretical texts like Gender Trouble by Judith Butler made me become myself. Like I said, the bell hooks quote about the violence men do to the feminine within them changed how I understood my own childhood and made my relationship to my gender as an adult completely different. So I'm a different person. I write about this in the book. Like I read Judith Butler because of Kay, who's my best friend I almost had a kid with, and I read Marx because of Salima, and I'm fundamentally a different human having had those readerly experiences. As we move into this world where everyone just assumes AI book summaries are going to like replace the book, and everyone's books aren't selling, and it just is those experiences that I have had. Theory is hard, Marx is hard, Butler is hard. Everyone talks about what a drag it is to read these books. If you put in the work, they can be incredibly transformative in a way that you come out of a text carrying marks of that text within your psyche. The time that it takes and the hard work that it takes to do it is a part of that transformation of self. It certainly has been for me. So that's why I think theory always, in the same way that science always comes into my work, because I'm a practicing scientist. I'm sitting in my science office right now. I've been in lab working with yeast cells all day. So these things feel like inextricable parts of myself. And I think I spent a lot of time as a writer fighting to not be a science writer or to write things not so theoretical, maybe to be more marketable. But I think if I'm honest about who I am and reflect that on the page, those things will always come in.
Yes, and that is so inspiring. And this book, it's a hybrid. It contains so many types of nonfiction writing. It's a mutant, right? And yet it all feels unified. It's all a piece, it's all a work of art. And it is so exciting to me to see the many types of stories and ideas and theory and feelings that this form can hold. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I think I thought about at some point, right, turning this into fiction, right? It would have alleviated a lot of the issues that I had with not alleviated, it would have altered the issues I had with the people I lived this with if I could just fictionalize it. But it felt there was something essential to say, no, this happened to me. This is not autofiction. This is memoir. This is something that happened in my body. Making a kid is something that is happening to your body, in your body, by and through your body. And so claiming that, even as the book has like these elements that would be labeled by most people as fictive. And I had an incredible editor who was just like, yeah, let's fucking go for it. It was never a question about like what do we do with this hybrid form. It was like, if this is what happened to you and this is what you want to write, let's make it really good. So yeah, I think there's something very powerful in memoir about that claim that you make to proximity of the story, the proximity of the body to the story.
It's also a book about food. I mean, you're writing about the meals you make, it's delicious. Do you have a book about food in your future? And what are you cooking these days?
Thank you. I think this is totally a book about food more than I planned on it being. Um, and the biggest thing that I'm excited about cooking is um, Salima's kid is 3.5 and loves making pasta dough. And so that thing that I thought I had lost by not having my own kid, of this feeling that I had when me and my mom made homemade pasta growing up, is actually something that I do get to share with with a child that I'm very close to and have a sort of role that is, I'm not a co-parent, but I'm more than an uncle. And it's just funny, and doing playing the whole game of how you get them to eat the pasta. You can never tell a toddler, do you want this for dinner? It's always, do you want this or that? And then they get the agency of making a choice, but you also get them to eat their food. So yeah, it's that's what I'm thinking about. It's just the experiences I've had cooking with the little ones in my life. And again, sort of being surprised at loving my relationship to these kids unconditionally and without needing it to be more than what it is.
Joe, thank you so much. This was a delight and mind expanding. Please, listeners, support Joe. Support great writing and do yourself a favor by picking up a copy of Spawning Season: An Experiment in Queer Parenthood.
Thank you so much.
In collaboration with is brought to you by the Teaching Cooperative Writing Collab, an artist-owned and run organization which provides online classes, workshops, accountability groups, and other community programs. Fall classes are available with offerings for writers of fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, and translation. Find us at writingcolab.com. That's writingco-lab.com to learn more and subscribe to our newsletter. You can also find us on Substack and Instagram, as well as wherever podcasts are available. I'm Brian Gresko, sending creative vibes your way. Thanks for listening.